Season 2, Episode 5, Anchor. Chapter 1, The Drive. Iris Kovacs lived on a north side block where the houses had been built between the wars and the trees had been let alone since. It gave the street the steady shaded look of a place that had been settling into itself for decades. I was driving north on Linden a little before 9. A cup of station coffee in the holder. The morning gone over to the kind of high gray sky that October sometimes settled into when it couldn't decide between sun and rain. The case file Iris had emailed me sat folded twice in my coat pocket. It was a family arrangement involving a mother and her grown son. The son had agreed to the placement reluctantly, but the mother had not. The gap between those two facts was the thing I had been thinking about while I drove. The bracelet was warm at my pulse, the way it had been warm for 3 weeks. Quiet since the parking lot. I had stopped checking it because there was nothing to check. Eddie was in the passenger seat with his hand resting on his knee. The morning sun came through the windshield at a low angle and laid a stripe across his sleeve at the cuff. It stayed there, sharp and specific. His solidity had been like that for weeks now. He had said something a few minutes back about the leaves on Linden. The way they were holding later than usual on this block. I had agreed without really hearing it. Iris had reached me through Marcus's old contact down at St. Casimir. He was the one who passed Marcus referrals when the parish bulletin board produced something Marcus thought I should see. Iris had a son in his late 30s named David. David had walked out of a relationship 8 years ago, leaving behind a partner and a young daughter, both still alive when he left. The partner had died last year of an aneurysm. David had not learned about it for 10 months. He had not been in the kind of contact with anyone in that life that would have told him. 2 months ago, someone had told him, and the cost had come up to the surface where the cost had been all along. Iris had been watching her son not sleep for 2 months and had decided to do something about it. The decision Iris had made was that she would carry his cost. I had handled family arrangements before. 3 or 4 a year, sometimes more, of a few different flavors. Most of them were small redirections within a household. Minor inconveniences. Low-grade weight. A son taking a parent's chronic something so the parent could enjoy a clean stretch at the end. Once or twice they had been bigger. A father taking his daughter's hospital aftermath because she was newly widowed and could not carry it and run a household at the same time. A wife taking her husband's career setback because she had her own work to lean on and his was a wound. The placements were ethical when both parties wanted them, and the bearer had the room. Iris had the room. She had emailed me a long, careful paragraph about her own health and her own work, and her own life that read like a person who had thought through the math without sentimentality. She was 64 and had retired in the spring from 41 years of bookkeeping at a hardware company on the south side. She had time, she had nothing else going, and she wanted this. David had agreed because his mother would not stop asking. That was in the file too. Iris had been honest about it, which was the first thing I liked about her without having met her. 3 blocks south of the Kovacs house, I came up on a stretch of Linden where the road bent slightly past a small triangular park. The last few minutes weren't where I had left them. Not a blackout. Just absence, the way you sometimes pull into your own driveway at the end of a long day and discover you have no memory of the drive home. Except this was not the end of a long day. It was the start of one, and I had been on Linden the whole way through, and the 4-way stop ahead of me was 3 blocks from where I was supposed to be. I came up on the stop behind a delivery truck that had stopped early and waited my turn. Eddie was looking at me. "You missed the light back there," he said. "Did I? It was yellow when we hit it. You went through it." I waited my turn at the stop and rolled through and turned right onto the Kovacs block. I could feel Eddie still looking at me, but I did not look back at him. I didn't remember the last 20 minutes of the drive. Didn't matter. The work was 3 doors up on the left, and Iris was waiting. "Long week," I said. Eddie did not say anything to that. The Kovacs' house was 2 stories with white siding and a wraparound porch that had been there before the railing, which was newer. The lawn had been kept up. A planter on the porch was full of mums in 3 colors. The driveway had a single car in it. An older sedan with a bumper that somebody had reattached with adhesive and optimism. The file had said David drove a 2012 Buick. I parked at the curb and cut the engine and sat for a moment with my hand still on the key. Eddie was in the seat next to me with his eyes on me, not pressing, not asking, just watching me the way he did when he had something he wasn't going to say yet. "Let's go do the work," I said. Eddie said all right. And we got out of the Taurus and went up the walk to Iris Kovacs' porch. Chapter 2. The Reading. Iris answered the door in a green cardigan over a white blouse and a pair of dark trousers. They had been pressed with the kind of attention that said pressing trousers was something she still did on Tuesday nights for the week ahead. She was a little under average height, with silver hair cut short and combed neatly back. She had her glasses on a chain around her neck, and she was holding them in one hand. And when she shook my hand, the glasses tapped against my forearm without her noticing. "Mr. Vance," she said. "Thank you for coming. David is in the living room." She stepped aside to let me in, and the front hall smelled faintly of toast and something else I couldn't place at first and then could. Laundry detergent on warm air, the kind of smell a house has on the morning the sheets have been changed. From the kitchen down the hall, a small radio was playing low. Talk station. A man's voice ran through the morning's local news at a level you couldn't follow without leaning in. The living room was off to the left, a room with 2 windows facing the street, and a couch and an armchair, and a low table between them. Practical furniture. A bookshelf along one wall with hardcovers and paperbacks in the orderly arrangement of a person who read them and put them back. A framed photograph on a side table of a younger Iris with a man who had to be her late husband. The 2 of them on the porch of this same house with a kitten between them. David Kovacs was in the armchair across from the couch. He did not stand when I came in. He looked up. He was tall and a little thin, in a flannel shirt over a white undershirt. His hair was too long at the back where he hadn't gotten around to having it cut. The skin under his eyes had that specific darkness you got from months of not sleeping properly. Not the bruised look of one bad week, but the settled discoloration of a person whose nights had become something to get through, rather than something to count on. His hands were on the arms of the chair, and he did not move them when I came in. I introduced myself. He nodded, and he said his name in a voice that had been used too little that morning. I sat on the couch, and Iris sat at the other end of it, resting her hands on her lap and waiting for me to begin. I walked them through the process. I would do the reading in stages, Iris first, then David. I would work from the middle distance and get closer. If I found anything that did not match what we had agreed to, I would stop and we would talk about it. Either of them could ask me to stop at any point. After the reading, if everything held, we would move to the dining table and I would do the placement there. Iris said she understood, but David said nothing. He was looking at a point on the carpet about 3 feet in front of his shoes. I read Iris first. I let my attention settle into the quiet field that surrounds a person living, the way I had settled it across from Tamar a couple of weeks back. Except this time without the dread of finding what I had found there. Iris was clean, not unmarked, but settled. She had her own weights, and they were hers, sitting where she'd put them over years. The cardiac thing from her email was real and small and managed. The grief for her husband was older and had quieted. There was room in her for what she wanted to take. I came back to the room and asked her if she had anything she wanted to ask before I read David. She said she did not. Eddie had taken up a position by the bookshelf where he could see the room without being in the way of it, and his eyes had moved between the 2 of them while I worked. I did not look at him directly. I knew he was there. I moved to the armchair side of the room and asked David if he was ready. David said, "Go ahead." I knelt to bring myself to his level, and I rested my fingers lightly above his wrist. He did not flinch, and he did not look at me. The cost was there. It wasn't the largest cost I had touched, and it wasn't the worst shaped, but it had settled deep. The way costs settle when someone has been carrying them by choice for years, refusing to put them down, day after day, until the refusal calcifies. Around the cost was grief. Not the cost of the grief, but the grief itself, separate. A different kind of weight, the kind I had no business touching and could not move if I tried. The grief was for the partner who had died last year and the daughter he had not gone back to. It had wound itself around the cost the way a vine winds around a fence rail. Two things grown into each other, but still two things. I came back up and David was looking at me. The point on the carpet had not held him. "It's there," I said. "I can move it. The grief stays where it is." He nodded. I turned and looked at Iris, who had been sitting on the couch with her hands still in her lap. "What I felt in your son is mostly the cost. There is also grief, but the grief is not adjustable, and I can do nothing with it. What I can move is the cost. After the placement, he will still be grieving the way he is grieving now. Some of what looks like the cost from the outside may not change." Iris said she had thought that might be the case, and that she wanted to do it anyway. I asked David if he wanted this. He took a long time to answer. He looked at the point on the carpet again, then at his mother, then back at me. "It's not going to fix what I did," he said. "No," I said. "And it's not going to make the kid not exist." "No." He rubbed a hand across his face. "Yes," he said. "Go ahead." It was not the kind of yes I would have liked to hear before doing the work. Not unkind to him to note that. He had sat in the chair through the asking and the asking and the asking that his mother had told me about. He had come to the day, and he was sitting in the chair now. It was the yes of a man who had stopped trying to stop the day from happening to him. I had taken yeses like that before. The work was the same. I asked them to come to the dining table. Iris stood. David stood after her, slowly, like a man getting up from a longer chair than this one had been. Eddie shifted from the bookshelf to the doorway between the rooms. The dining room was through an archway, and the table was a round oak thing with 4 chairs around it. Iris pulled out 2 chairs across from each other and looked at me. I asked them to sit on the same side instead, and to face me. They did. I sat across from them and put my hands on the table. "I'm going to put one hand on each of you," I said. "Forearm, just below the elbow. You'll feel a warmth. The work will take a couple of minutes. If anything is wrong, I'll know and I'll stop. Don't talk during the placement unless I ask you to. Try not to think about anything in particular. Just sit." They both nodded. I reached out and laid my left hand on Iris's forearm and my right hand on David's. The bracelet on my right wrist sat against the inside of my own arm, where it always sat, and the warmth at my pulse stayed at the baseline it had been at all morning. I closed my eyes. The work began the way these works always began. I let the cost in David rise to the surface. I separated it from the grief around it as carefully as I could. The way you separate 2 threads that have been wound together for a long time. Some of the grief came up with the cost in the first pass. The way grief did. And I let it settle back down before I went any further. Iris's body was quiet under my left hand. She was holding her breath. I told her without speaking to keep breathing, and she did. Second pass. The cost came up cleaner this time. Separated from the grief. Sitting in a shape I could move. I drew it through myself toward Iris. The conduit was working. I could feel the cost passing through the channel of my own body, the way I always felt these things. A brief wait that was on its way to somewhere and not staying. Iris's body opened to receive it the way a room opens to a guest. The cost began to settle. I reached for the son's name to anchor the work to his identity. The name was not there. I was looking at him with my eyes closed, holding his arm. working through my own body to move a weight he had carried for 8 years. I reached for the syllables of his given name. There was nothing where they should have been. The slot was empty. The absence had the same shape as the missing minutes from the morning's drive on Linden. The same flatness where there should have been a pull. The kitchen radio 2 rooms away dropped out of its talk show. It held a thin, sustained tone for the length of a held breath, then dropped back in. A drone. Patient. Gone before Iris would have noticed, if Iris had been the kind of person who noticed radios. In the doorway, Eddie's head came up. I worked around the missing name. Practitioners learn this in the first year, widening a focus to the man across the table instead of pinning to a given name when the given name slips. It is a workaround for fatigue, distraction, and the ordinary failures of attention that a long career produces. I did not normally need it, but I needed it now. The work continued and the cost finished its passage, settling into Iris fully. She breathed in, deeper than she had been breathing, and out. David's body, under my right hand, relaxed by a small fraction of an inch in his shoulder. The name came back 2 breaths later, David, there where it had been the whole time. I closed the work and lifted my hands. I sat for a moment with my eyes still shut to come up cleanly. And when I opened them, Iris was looking at me with the patience of a person who had been watching her son not sleep for 2 months and could afford another minute of waiting. David was looking at his hands. "It's done," I said. I gave Iris standard aftercare. The cost would settle further over the next 24 hours. She might feel tired. She might feel a heaviness in her chest that would ease by morning. If anything was sharper than that, if she could not get out of bed, if breathing felt wrong, she should call me. I gave her the number a second time. To David I said nothing, because there was nothing he wanted from me. We stood. I shook Iris's hand, and she thanked me. I told her I would check in by phone tomorrow afternoon. I shook David's hand, and his hand was loose in mine, and he did not meet my eye. Iris walked me to the front door. On the porch, she stopped me with a hand on my sleeve. "Mr. Vance," she said, "he won't thank me for this. That's all right. He doesn't have to." I said I understood. "I just wanted to know what he was carrying," she said. "Now, I do." I went down the steps to the walk and across to the Taurus. Eddie was already in the passenger seat. I got in and closed the door and sat with my hand on the key. I did not start the engine. Chapter 3. The Walk. I called Marcus from the curb outside the Kovacs' house. He picked up on the 3rd ring. "You busy this afternoon?" I said. "I'm leaving the shop in 15 minutes, he said. "Lorraine on Tuesday and Thursday, and the other one on Wednesday. Today's Wednesday." "Where do you cut through?" I asked. "Down Garfield to Whittier and across the park," he said. "If you're catching me, catch me at the deli on Whittier." "I'll be there in 20. "Catch you there," I said, and ended the call. I started the Taurus and sat for another moment with my hand on the wheel. Eddie was looking at the dashboard. "Marcus's walk," he said. "I'll wait in the car. I'd appreciate it." He didn't ask, and I didn't explain. I drove us across town, south to Marcus's neighborhood. The streets went from the white siding north side to the brick and aluminum middle of the city, and finally to the block where the pawn shop sat between a Vietnamese bakery and a hair salon that had been a barber shop in another life. I parked 2 doors down from the deli on Whittier and cut the engine. "I won't be long," I said. Eddie didn't push back on that. I got out and stood on the sidewalk. The afternoon had warmed a little since the morning, and the gray sky had thinned into the kind of gray that suggested the sun was somewhere up there, if you waited long enough. The deli had a sign in the window that said homemade soup daily, and a smaller sign under it that said eat in or take out. I waited near the door. Marcus came around the corner from the direction of the shop, walking the way he walked. It was a slightly bow-legged, unhurried stride that had brought him through 6.5 decades and had no plans to change for the rest. He had on a brown overcoat and a dark gray flat cap and a green scarf that was not for warmth, but for color. He saw me and did not slow down. And when he reached the deli door, he opened it and held it for me, and I went in after him. The air inside the deli was bread and onions and the kind of cured meat that cost what it cost. Marcus went to the counter and ordered a quart of chicken and rice for Lorraine and a half-pound of corned beef for himself. The man behind the counter knew his order without him saying it, and was already starting to ladle the soup into a paper container before Marcus finished the sentence. We waited. Marcus did not introduce me to the man behind the counter, and the man did not ask. I bought a coffee I did not particularly want. Marcus paid and took the bag, and we went out onto Whittier. He turned south toward the park, and I fell in beside him, and we walked. For a block he didn't say anything, and I did not press. We crossed Whittier at the light and went into the small park that was 3 blocks square and had been a park since the city had been a city. It had old maple trees, a fountain that had not run since spring, and a couple of benches where 2 old men were playing chess in coats. Marcus nodded at one of them, and we kept walking. "All right, young man," Marcus said. "What's the question?" "Hypothetical," I said. I told him I was trying to remember a story I might have heard about a practitioner who'd started having trouble holding attention during the work. Losing an hour here, a name there. I couldn't place where I had heard it from. Marcus walked. We came out of the park on the other side and turned onto a residential block of 2-story houses with little front yards and chain-link fences. Marcus's pace did not change. "Joseph Vidal," he said. "That's the one you're thinking of." The name didn't mean anything to me. "You wouldn't have heard it from me," Marcus said. "Probably from one of the older ones. Renata, maybe, or that fellow in Lorimer who passed last spring. It's the kind of story that gets told in the field and not in the books because the books don't have a box for it." What was the shape of it? Marcus walked another quarter block before he answered. "Joseph Vidal worked before my time. The man who taught me the work used to talk about him. Vidal was in another city. The mechanics he was using were not mine, and they would not be yours. But the shape was the same. He was anchoring something specific in a system that wasn't built to anchor specific things. The system compensated. It pulled from him to balance what he was holding in place. What did it pull? Whatever was nearest to him, Marcus said. Time, names, the small things, and then the bigger ones. I asked how Joseph Vidal had handled it. Marcus walked. We were on a stretch of sidewalk where the concrete had buckled a little at the seams from old root pressure. He stepped around a buckled square without looking at it. He didn't, young man. I waited for more, but there wasn't more. We turned at the corner onto a block of small Cape Cods with trimmed hedges, and Marcus stopped at the third house from the corner and went up the walk. Lorraine answered the door in a housecoat and a knit hat, her voice gone gravelly with bronchitis. She thanked Marcus in the kind of voice that was mostly air. Marcus introduced me as a friend without giving my name. Lorraine took the bag. Marcus told her he'd be back Saturday, with the kind he made himself. And she said he didn't need to. And he said he knew he didn't need to. And she let it go because they had run this conversation before. She went back inside and shut the door. Marcus and I stood on her front walk. "You'll want to come back at me with the next question," Marcus said. I'm not going to have a better answer for it than I just had for the first one. Some stories are stories because there isn't an end on them yet. That isn't comforting. Marcus said. It isn't. He looked at me for a moment, the way he looked at people when he was deciding how much of what he saw to say out loud. He said the rest of it anyway. "You want to bring it to me when you have more?" he said. "I'll listen. I'm not going to have an answer, but I'll listen." I thanked him. He patted my arm and turned to walk back toward the deli. His quart of soup gone, his half-pound of corned beef in a paper bag in his other hand. I went the other way, back across the park toward where I had left the Taurus. Chapter 4. The Landing. The Taurus had gone cold in the time I had been on the walk. Eddie was in the passenger seat where I had left him. I got in and closed the door and started the engine and let it warm up while I sat with my hands on the wheel. Eddie asked if Marcus had given me what I needed. I said Marcus had given me what he had. Eddie said that was the same thing, and I told him it wasn't, and he left it. I put the Taurus in gear, pulled out of the parking spot, and drove north through the streets that took us back to my side of the city. The sky had thinned a little more during the walk. The sun was somewhere up there, but had not committed to coming through. Talk radio was on at the volume I had left it at this morning. A different host was reading off school closings for tomorrow because of weather that was not predicted to arrive until the afternoon. I let it run. Eddie watched the buildings go past for a few blocks before he said anything else. "You're chewing on the kid." I let him have that. I was not chewing on the kid. I was chewing on what had happened in the second pass, when the name went away from me. And on Marcus's flat sentence about Vidal, that wasn't even an answer to a question I had asked aloud. And on the morning's drive on Linden, where I had lost 3 blocks of attention without noticing them go. But Eddie had given me a place to put what he was reading on my face, and I was tired enough not to correct him. "He didn't want it," Eddie said. "The mother wanted it. He sat there because he didn't have it in him to fight her another day. The mother got what she wanted. The kid got out from under a thing he didn't believe in getting out from under. And nobody in the room thought it was going to fix anything. No. Including the practitioner," Eddie said. I didn't answer that one. "You thinking it should have been a refusal?" "I don't know what it should have been," I said. It was what they asked for. The mother had the room, and the cost moved clean. The kid was as much yes as he was going to be. And that's a yes. "It's a yes if you take it as one," Eddie said. I said I had, and he left it alone. Eddie was quiet for a while. We crossed the river on the lower bridge. The water was the color it always was at this time of year. The gray-brown of leaf runoff and a sky that had not committed to anything. Eddie worked the rest of it out aloud while we crossed the bridge. Iris would do something else when she saw it hadn't taken, because in his reckoning that was how mothers worked. I told him I wouldn't know, and he let that go. He had let it go 100 times before. We drove the rest of the way in the easy silence of 2 people who had learned not to say everything they were thinking. I parked in the space behind my building and cut the engine. We sat for a moment with the heat ticking off the cooling engine and the radio gone quiet because I had cut the engine. "You all right?" Eddie said. It was not a question of the kind he asked often. He had asked it a couple of times today already. The first time on Linden this morning when I had run a yellow without noticing. The second time outside Iris's when I had been sitting in the car with my hand on the key and not turning it. Each time I had said yes. He was asking again because the answer he had been getting was not the answer he was looking for. "Long day," I said. He looked at me for a moment in the dim of the parked car. Then he gave me the small nod he did when he was filing something he wasn't going to bring up again right now. "All right," he said. We got out and went up the back stairs to my apartment. I unlocked the door and we went in. The apartment was the way I had left it that morning. Lived in, but not unkempt. The radiator was already on against the cold that had been creeping into the building for a week. I dropped my keys in the bowl by the door and shrugged out of my coat and hung it on the hook. I went into the kitchen and put water in the kettle and set it on the burner and turned the burner on. Eddie went to the armchair near the window and sat down. I came back into the living room and sat on the couch across from him with my hands on my knees. The light through the window had gone the soft gray of late afternoon. from a few apartments over a baby was crying in the way babies sometimes cried late in the day, awake longer than they had budgeted for. The radiator clicked. I watched the window. After a while, a high keening started up from the kitchen, and for a moment I didn't know what it was. Eddie called my name, and I was already up. I went into the kitchen and took the kettle off the burner. I poured some water into a mug and dropped a tea bag in and watched the water go from clear to brown around the bag. Then I picked up the mug by the handle and brought it back to the living room and set it on the low table between the couch and the armchair. I sat down on the couch and looked at the steam coming off the surface of the tea. Iris had stopped me on her porch with her hand on my sleeve. She had said he wouldn't thank her for this. That was all right, and he didn't have to. She had just wanted to know what he was carrying. Now she did. I had said I understood, but I had not said the rest. I had read what her son was carrying. I had moved part of it, but I could not move the rest. The part I had moved had cost me a name. It was a name I had needed in the middle of the work. The grief had stayed because the grief was not adjustable. The cost had moved because the cost was, and in the middle of that work, in a borrowed dining room in a stranger's house, something had reached into me. It had taken the syllables of a man's name out of the place where I kept them. The baby in the apartment 3 over had stopped crying, and the radiator clicked. Eddie mentioned a referral he'd been meaning to look at. Small thing. The kind he floated when a room had gotten too quiet and he wanted to put something in it. I made a sound, and he let it go. The tea on the low table cooled. After a while, I got up and took the cup to the kitchen and emptied it into the sink and rinsed it and set it on the rack to dry. I came back through the living room and stopped beside the armchair where Eddie was sitting. "Long day," I said. Eddie said I had said that already, but I told him it was still true. "All right, Sam," Eddie said. I left him in the chair and went to bed.
Chapter Guild, Stories for Your Mind.